Thank you so much. So good morning, everybody. And I want to start by thanking you for stimulating a bit my mind, and because interculturality was not one of my key topics. I'm not an expert, but now it is one of my main interests because I think revisiting this history through the lens of interculturality is quite stimulating. So I will share some ideas, and maybe you will sometimes disagree. We have the discussion to discuss it, but it's prospective, and I try to go through several studies I conducted through, probably something like 25 years of studies in history of the internet, to try to reinterpret it a bit more related to this question of interculturality. So now comes the difficult moment where I will try to share my screen because as I told you, it is a new computer and I'm not very at ease with it, but it should work at some point. Okay, here it is, up, and just let me know if it is okay.
That's perfect. We can see your screen well, and we can just see
Okay.
your slides. So yes, that's
Perfect.
perfect.
And I can't see you at all. So if anything is happening, I would not like to end up my talk alone without with a connection collapsing or something. Just open your mic and talk to me if there is an issue, and I will immediately start. And so, as I told you, I will revisit 3 periods of topics and ways of negotiating interculturality through internet history. So it's very prospective. And I will go from protocols, infrastructures, what in science and technology studies they would call pipes and mortars in some ways, to more topics more related to digital content, digital culture. So there will be 4 times. The first one will start in the 70s with, or end of the 60s, with ARPANET and the very beginning of the internet. We will then go through the 90s when the web started to be more popular and reach the general public, and notably we'll study shortly the transition between analog and digital, but also between several kinds of digital and notably CD-ROMs and the web. The third topic will be related also to the popularization of the web and these newbies versus early adopters, encounters and frictions. And finally, we will go through the topic of memes and remix and viral cultures. So let's start with a first time at the very beginning of what will become the internet, which is the ARPANET, so the network that was developed at the Advanced Research ARPA agency. And here I think there is something quite interesting to study through the concept of interculturality, because all of this history is an encounter between several communities, between several technical communities, but also it has to be embedded in a special context, which is the Cold War. But as you know, there was also all this EP movement and also student protests and so on, and academia and industry and the military world had to negotiate to develop ARPANET. And this is quite interesting if we think about it through interculturality. Of course, we won't be able to revisit the whole history of ARPANET. It will be too broad, but here are a few pictures that can also lead you to rediscover a bit more of the context. So first, I started with quotation by Paul Ceruzzi, which is about the notion of packets in ARPANET, and the idea of creating also a network that will be able not to avoid a nuclear war, but to maintain communication channels through diplomatic crisis. Of course, Paul Baran, who worked at the RAND Corporation, was driven by questions that were related to security, that were related also to the Cold War context. And he was one that was trying to develop this notion of decentralized networks that could be resilient even if there is a major crisis. But if we go back to the cultural and intellectual origins of ARPANET and then Internet, we may find a lot of genealogies, a lot of names that will come into our mind, starting, for instance, with Paul Otley and the Mondaneum and this idea in Belgium during after World War I and when the Société des Nations, SDN, was created, to also create a kind of universal knowledge. And we can find this kind of tendency to create paths and bridges to universal knowledge, to connect knowledge and so on in the whole history of the internet. May it be, for instance, initiatives like Wikipedia, like Internet Archive, and so on. So here, and also Otley is called the father of modern documentation. So here we have an origin that we can also connect to other paths and other visions, like the one by Vannevar Bush, for instance, just after World War II, with the MEMEX, the memory extender, and this idea also of connecting knowledge and creating also storage and access for memories. We may also evoke or cite or quote Douglas Engelbart and the famous mother of all demos, that was also a demonstration of interactivity and the possibilities of computers. It was in the late 60s. And again, computing is there, encountering also strong ideas related to giving access to information, to knowledge, connecting also things. And another one who is very interesting is, of course, Ted Nelson with Xanadu. Ted Nelson, who coined the term hyperlink, also in the late 60s, and who developed this crazy project Xanadu, that was replaced in some ways by the World Wide Web, was also driven by this idea of connectivity, but also not of connecting only computers, but also information and so on. And all these ideas and the need for more decentralized, I would say, computer networks will lead to the internet and the web. But if we connect all these figures that we have already mentioned very shortly, we can see very different origins of people. For example, Douglas Engelbart is a computer scientist and someone who is really oriented towards computing. Ted Nelson is also, of course, interested in computing and networks, but is a sociologist by training. Otley was in the field of law and involved in movements that were oriented towards peace and very involved in international also organizations. So we can see something which is through time very diverse by culture, by disciplines, but also by origins if we go through these figures. Here is a slide that we designed a few years ago with Alexandre Serre, which was also trying to summarize a bit the origins of interactive computing. And here, again, we can see that there is a mixture of things that are driven by facilitating the sharing of information. For instance, time sharing was at the time a norm in the beginning of the 60s. The computers were big machines. They were slow to process and to process tasks and information. So there was this quest for computers that would be more interactive, that could share resources and so on. But there are also all this research that are driven by this idea of augmenting intelligence, of the man-computer symbiosis, virtual libraries, and so on. And of course, Lightrider is a key figure also at ARPA for the development of the department that would also host the first steps of ARPANET. And as many of you may know, what will change with ARPANET and then with Internet is also the idea of connect different types of networks at the time. So end of the 60s, mostly networks were already connected, but through proprietary systems. So you had networks by Digital Equipment Corporation, by IBM, and so on, but they were unable to discuss together. And this idea of sharing resources, but also of connecting different types of material, plus the idea by Paul Baron of creating also decentralized networks that could be resilient to crisis. You can see on the right this idea of an internet network that is decentralized and which is also no more vulnerable to an attack, because it's not just about one, as on the left, one target that could destroy the whole network, will drive all these efforts towards ARPANET and the Internet. So there were, of course, a lot of books related to this history. If you can see a mixture of books, some were written at the time of the development of the Internet. For instance, on the left, Netizens by Michael and Rhonda Oben, which was written in 96. There are also scholarly books that were pioneer in the field, like The Internet Imaginary by Patrice Flichy, or Inventing the Internet by Jeannette Abaté. And there is a book by Fred Turner on the Whole Earth Catalog and the history of Stewart Brand, which is for me a key figure in this history of interculturality, of people who are creating bridges between several cultures. In the Internet Imaginary, Patrice Flichy is coming back to hacker culture, academic cultures, and many cultures that were connecting through the development of the Internet, while Jeannette Abaté was producing an history which is more technical, but which is also explaining us how many institutions, but also communities, will come together to develop ARPANET and then Internet, may it be the academic world or the industrial world. For example, we'll come back to it a bit later on with the company Bolt, Beranek, and Newman, who created the interface message processors within the ARPANET network. What is interesting with the book by Fred Turner, who is highlighting another figure, which is Stewart Brand, is the history of someone who was not an innovator, but someone who was a bridge between the hippie communities and the movement of the late 60s towards counterculture and the field of computing and innovation in the field of networks. These kind of figures that were put in the shadows for a long time in the history of the Internet, because it was focusing really on the innovators, is very interesting to see also these developments towards something which is more cultural and also more oriented towards personal communication, communities-oriented communication within the network. And it's very related to what Michael and Rhonda Oben had in mind when they started to use some networks, which is this idea of connecting people. And I think if we come back to their words in Netizens, where it's very well known, welcome to the 21st century. It was written in the 96. You are a netizen, a net citizen, and you exist as a citizen of the world thanks to the global connectivity that the net makes possible. You consider everyone as your compatriot. You physically live in one country, but you are in contact with much of the world via the global computer network and so on. It has a strong echo. Of course, it is full of utopia, imaginaries of the first steps of the internet. But I think we can also connect it in some ways to all this history of globalization of the network. First, utopia, of course, of the internet, the idea of netizens, the circulation of cultures, and I found very interesting this idea of digital cosmopolitanism that Fergal and Roman developed in their book, because we can also rethink this history and this idea of a netizen through this idea of digital cosmopolitanism. I had never this word digital cosmopolitanism in mind before I saw the book by Fergal Linehan and Roman Litz, but I really think here we have some connections through time from the very beginning of the internet and the web in this case, and the current situation. But to go back a bit more through ARPANET, I would also like to highlight the way all these institutions and all these computers that the ARPANET network wanted to connect were able to bypass in some way this proprietary system, this closed world of proprietary norms and standards. And one key thing was what you can see as a small circle. It is IMP, Interface Message Processors. These IMP were designed by a company which was Bolt, Beranek and Newman, that was selected as the company for building these equipments that would allow, for example, PDP 10 or 11 to discuss with an UNIVAC, for example, as you can see on the map, or other kind of equipment. So the idea is that it would allow to connect devices, computers from several manufacturers. There we can see in some ways the interface message processor as a way, a gateway for connecting different culture and organizations. We can see on this map, for instance, MITRE or ARPA, which were, or RAND on the left, which were organizations related to security, with other type of companies, like, for instance, university. We can see on the left and on the bottom the SRI, Stanford Research Institutes, and many other universities also on this map. So I will define in some ways what some would call boundary object in STS, but the IMP has also an intercultural object, or an object that is facilitating translation and connections for different types of equipments. And of course, the history of the internet is not entirely focused on the US history. There were also developments related to connecting networks or creating also some heterogeneity in networks in other countries. And I would like to zoom very shortly on one network that I studied 20 years ago, which was the C²DH network, which was developed in France at a Center for Computing in RIA under the supervision of Louis Pouzin that you can see on the picture. And yeah, coming back to these archives, I found very interesting the caricature on the right, which is full of stereotypes. Of course, it's a comics, and it was also a communication tool to drive or people interest. But when you have a look at, for instance, these comics with Siemens and the other, you see that we are not just talking about equipments and computers, but also about several stakeholders and cultures that are trying to negotiate between each others. 20 years ago, when I defended my PhD thesis on this history of C²DH, which was computer networks who faced another network in France, which was Transpac, developed by the telecommunication world, and there were a lot of fights and misunderstanding and tensions and negotiation between both networks. I was talking already about some battles of cultures. One culture for me was the culture of the computer scientists who developed C²DH, and the other culture, so the telecommunication world, that was designing at the same time, which is the 70s, another network so-called Transpac. Why was I talking about two different types of culture? It is because both networks had implemented a packet switching network. So the idea of dividing the messages that are circulating within the networks into small packets that would travel through the network. It's also at the basis of the ARPANET design. This idea of having a message cut in small packets that can travel through the networks using potentially different nodes to reach their destination. And C²DH and Transpac had both this idea of packets, but they implemented them in a different way. For C²DH, each packet could go through a different way and different nodes, and it is only at the end of the travel, when reaching the final destination, that all the packets will be put together again. While for the telecommunication network world, there will be virtual circuit, which means they will divide the message in small packets, but the packets will follow. The packets from the same message will follow themselves to reach the final destination. For the computer scientists, it was totally not stupid, but not efficient. They thought that it was more efficient to let the packet do whatever they wish into the network. It will be more fast. It will be, while the telecommunication world was saying, but for quality control, for security, for our customers, for our clients, and so on, it's not possible. We have to ensure the quality and the control within the networks. And there were a lot of discussions between both networks, a lot of fights and so on. And for me, in some ways, it was a question of culture between computer and telecommunication engineers, a question of culture between institutions. The computer scientists from C²DH were very close from the internet world. They were also not discussing in the same arenas of standardization. They had not the same goals because C²DH was experimental while the telecommunication world was really thinking about implementing the network in some ways fast, and for also their clients, which were at the time mostly companies. And I remember that after my PhD defense, there were a lot of discussions, and notably in the French world of these previous stakeholders related to this idea of culture. They were very reluctant to it, and one argument was, for instance, that Pouzin, when C²DH was shut down in 1979, had been able then to find another job in the telecommunication sector. So he was not driven by culture because he could go from one world to another. These engineers from these past histories were very reluctant to, in some ways, interpreting their history through the lens of culture. They were rational for them. The decisions they made at the times were driven by technicalities. It could not be something that was related, that was cultural. It was something more technical and rational. But when you see the current battles that are still at stake and the memories that are still at stake currently related to this history, you can see that I guess it is still a question of something which is really not just technical, but which is also strongly into the way these guys at the time and still now imagined futures, uses, values that should drive also their work and the way they were implementing networks. I will be very short with the Minitel, but as I mentioned, Transpac and the telecommunication world, Transpac was the network who was at the core of the use in France of Minitel in the 80s. And why is also the Minitel and then the web a question of several cultures trying to go together and to understand in some ways each other's. I think the Minitel was really key in these questions before the web, because it was strongly implemented in France. It was designed by the telecommunication world, but they had also to provide services that were developed by companies, by the press, by and so on. And it was the first attempt to also give the general public the use of online services. And in France, it was, of course, not mainstream, but widely used. And there are a lot of things that are interesting in the history of the Minitel. One thing, for instance, is the way the keyboard was designed, first by using the order of the alphabet ABC. And this, for instance, keyboards were trial and error, because they were then changed to come back to keyboards that were AZERTY keyboards. And here you see negotiation also between designers, the general public, and so on. They noticed that finally this choice of a first keyboard was absolutely not efficient, because for the people who had never used a keyboard, it was not so intuitive. And for people who were accustomed to keyboards and computers, it was a waste of time to, again, rediscover another type of keyboard while they were using already AZERTY keyboards. To close this first, and the others will be a bit shorter, of course, topic, I think that we have there a lot of potential questions that may be open, starting with this question of the ARPANET, which are related to infrastructure, standards, the question, of course, of openness, but also the question of governance and the way interculturality may be or has been negotiated and is still negotiated in the field of technical standards, norms, and so on. Of course, we have to take into account this question of multi-stakeholderism and the question in standard arenas of reaching a consensus. For instance, many arenas are trying to reach a kind of ecumenism. It was the case, for example, with an architectural model that was competing with the internet, which was the OSI. And this open standard architecture or layers, seven layers to design open networks was a very slow process, while the internet community went toward what they called raw consensus and running code. So this question of ecumenism versus running code and raw consensus is probably something key to understand this history. And here the question of being intercultural, being also ecumenist or not is probably very interesting to study. Of course, in these questions of standards and protocols and so on, there are a lot of asymmetries, negotiation of powers. I try to show how one gateway or bridge, which was the IMP, could act as a technical actor to also favor connection between different communities and culture, and probably studying the history of gateways through this lens will be extremely interesting. I will move very shortly to another point and another kind of bridge, which is the case of transient technologies like CD-ROMs, which I'm currently studying. Here I will be quite short. But I wanted to remind you about this time where you had to use CD-ROMs for accessing the web, which was the second half of the 90s. And this encounter of very material artifacts and the digital world in some ways. And here again, I think it's interesting to go through this history of transient artifact and all the hybrid models that were developed at the time to bridge several worlds in some ways, to bridge, for example, networks and notably phone lines, telecommunication lines with the internet, to also bridge networks of distribution, to bridge, for example, the computers and the network, but also to connect people who were providing access to the internet, ISP, with people who were developing content, to also connect several kind of network and content. Here, for instance, you can see that it's possible to emulate the Minitel that I mentioned, while also accessing the internet and the web which is not mentioned, but it was, of course, also one of the goals of this network. Infony is very interesting because they were bridging Minitel, internet, computers, telecommunications network, and internet, but also they were trying to develop their own content and to be also content creators, and they were based really on a media model that was a bit more traditional than the web, allowing users to enter closed worlds that they had designed. And here we see also a lot of paths through what could be the digital future. The case of the CD-ROM is also interesting to create a connection between the analog world and the digital world, because you can find a lot of books and printed books related to CD-ROMs. I will come back to it a bit later on, but I like also that probably user manuals, but also all these types of guides, repositories, and so on, are also objects of interculturality. The CD-ROMs in print, for instance, may be related to a tradition in libraries, which is the books in print volume, with this catalog of all the CD-ROMs that were published. And if we go further into the content, we can also see that CD-ROMs were connecting a lot of different cultural interpreting and mixing them. Just one example, with a lot of versions, and for children, but also for reference for libraries and so on. And the CD-ROMs was also accompanied or supported by a lot of publication, as I mentioned, that are also very interesting, because a lot of them are at the crossroad of professional and amateurs training literature. And these kind of guides are also, when you go in depth into it, very interesting to rediscover first the first steps and attempts into a new digital world, but also this mixture of explaining CD-ROMs for dummies, but with also a kind of acculturation towards technology. There is sometimes a mixture of audience. You are addressing professionals or professionals in progress, but also early experts and pro-am, and this is very interesting. And finally, based on the collection of Alain Le Teneur, who created a collection of this kind of connection kit related to CD-ROMs, when you have a look at the cover, you can see also a whole world of media convergence, but also of circulation of culture between the popular culture, movie culture, and the ISP world. And here also it is interesting to see how popular culture and media will go from one support and one device to another. I won't have time to develop it at length, but connected to what I explained previously with the guides of CD-ROMs, then of the internet and so on, as also probably objects that can teach us a lot about the interculturality and the way to translate it for audiences. I want to also highlight very shortly this history of newbies, amateurs, early adopters, which started in the early steps of the web, but is still in progress. The history of the internet and the web and the uses of and digital culture is full of this kind of documentation of phone line to, for example, have a support when something is working badly. It was very costly to call these phone lines. If you go into BBS, Google Groups, and so on, you will see plenty of this kind of testimonies of users having also to call phone lines and assistance line and so on to make their computer work. And so there were also services that were there to try to help people, and notably newbies, to come into the digital world. And when you go through web archives, you will find interesting also archives from the early web that will demonstrate you that at the time, so mid-90s, the pages that were developed by amateurs, but also by companies, and could be very close. Here you have a page which is related to the Chambre de Commerce et d'Industrie, CCI, which normally is something serious because it is a window through their activities and related to commerce and industry. And you see all these banners, pictures, and so on that remind you about the early web, the vernacular culture of the early web. It's really very amateur. You can see that the boundaries between professional, amateurs, commercial websites, and information websites and personal pages are very thin and not already clearly defined because of a lack, of course, of support and this can be connected to the question of the newbies and entering the digital world. Maybe for the very beginning of the web, for the discussion in bulletin board systems or in digital groups, to the discussion you may find, for instance, in Wikipedia. You will see this question of the newbies who don't know about the rules and who are asking a lot of dumb questions, or don't know about the netiquette, which was a popular word in the 90s, and are making a lot of mistakes. And here is a current page of Wikipedia. Please do not bite the newcomers. And I started this part with the motto, read the fucking manual. This kind of encounter between communities that are early adopters and know the rules and the processes, and those who are coming and joining maybe the web or Wikipedia is really something you can find through the whole history of the internet. And finally, I will finish with the question of memes and the question of this kind of format and circulation through social networks. And I will have to do it very shortly, as I will run out of time. So, of course, memes have been studied already at length, for example, by Ryan Milner, Limor Schiffman, and others, but not necessarily through the lens of interculturality and circulation through several cultures. What is interesting is that memes are really, and notably certain types of memes related to very special culture, sometimes niche culture. And one that I wanted to demonstrate very shortly is all the memes that are related to medieval time, for example, medieval macros, starting, for instance, with these famous medieval tapestries that you can still find a lot online, and all this culture related to reinterpreting memes through reinterpreting medieval times through memes and digital culture, like Eminem songs through medieval orchestra and so on, or Joseph Ducreux, for instance, who is an old painter mixed with rap song. And
Valerie,
yeah.
sorry, just to say, we can no longer see your slides. We can only see black now. Sorry.
Okay. And now?
No, we still can't.
Oh. Okay, I will share again because it's very visual, but very shortly because I need also to conclude. So I'm sorry. Oh,
that's fine. That's fine.
Strange. Autorisé. Okay, what is happening with my slide? And here, is it back?
Yes. Yes. We can see
okay.
now.
So here it is. So I go very shortly. So I don't know when you saw very shortly, I guess, this medieval tapestry and Joseph Ducreux, right?
No, I think we missed that too, actually. Yeah.
So I start again, but in one sentence, memes as intercultural forms. So you have a lot of books. Here they are. Here you have the medieval memes. And notably, yeah, all this remix of culture from the past through a mixture of, for example, Joseph Ducreux self-portrayal with a rap song, and which is very famous. And I just want to highlight two very small examples. The one is a Rickroll, which is related to Rick Astley's song Never Gonna Give You Up. It's a prank on the internet that may be used to make just people laugh. So you have an access to an hyperlink, and you think it's an interesting content, like for instance, the demo of a video games, and it is not. It is Rick Astley singing Never Gonna Give You Up, who is popping up. But I wanted to highlight the fact that this kind of prank, like the Rickroll, were also used for political struggles, like, for instance, the Anonymous fighting Daesh, and releasing a lot of Rickroll on the net and on Daesh social network to try to disrupt them. That it was also used for protests for LGBTQ rights, also with people using the Rickroll to also convey their message through more LGBTQ rights. And I wanted also to take the case of Pepe the Frog, which is a meme that is often related to Trump and the alt-right, but which was used also in Hong Kong totally differently a few years ago to fight again police violence. And this kind of circulation of memes, this kind of use that are very different from one culture to another, this kind of symbol that can be a symbol of fight for rights or fight against freedom, is really interesting to study. Last but not least, I would like to refer to the Ukrainian versus Russia war, and this wall of memes that was created to also preserve memes related to Ukraine. You see one meme that was, for instance, preserved. I just wanted to highlight the fact that memes are very cultural, and it's sometimes quite hard to understand all the symbols that are in a meme if you don't know the meaning of a Shiba Inu, of a watermelon, for instance, which is celebrating the Kherson Liberation Day. And here, fortunately, you have experts like the one I quoted, who are able to also explain you a mixture of cultural and digital culture. So to conclude, in one sentence, in 1 minute, interculturality is, from my perspective, at the core of innovation and digital culture. And there are several ways of negotiating interculturality, from the gateways, the bridges, the manuals I highlighted, the cultural brokers like Stewart Brands, the technical arenas, to a kind of digital culture like appropriation, remix, and so on. Interculturality is also obvious in the sources and the archives we are studying, and we should also question our practices through the lens of interculturality, who has been, for instance, preserving GeoCities or a web archive, who is preserving social networks when it comes, for example, to the Black Lives Matter movement and so on. And there are also plenty of stakeholders and culture within archive centers and sources. There are many other histories that could be written through the lens of interculturality, the history of Unicode, of enclosures, of online communities. And of course, this history is a pessimistic one also in some ways. And revisiting through interculturality the topic of digital colonialism, like we are doing through this conference, algorithmic bias, gender gaps, accessibility, echo chambers, is of course also key to better understand this history of digital cultures. And I will stop there.